Hi, I'm Julie Silber, and here's a quilt story for the exhibition Known and Unknown. I'd like to tell you about how I got this quilt. I had a shop from 1971 to 81 in San Rafael, California. It was called Mary Strickler's Quilt. And during that time, um, I had a friend who was an antique dealer in San Francisco, a gentleman, and he called me one day and said that he had just been to the Beacons antique warehouse. Beacons is a moving company, and when people don't come and pick up their things, eventually they would go into a store. And in that store, which was kind of like a thrift store, there was a special section that was wired, caged, and locked because the better things went in there. And my friend Gil called and said, I've just been looking around for antiques. I went into Beacons, and Julie, I saw a quilt that I've never seen anything like before. I think you ought to go see it. It looks like it's narrative, and it looks like it's scratched, and it looks a little bit like those colored drawings that kids make where you put a bunch of colors, cover it in black, and then scrape back to the colors beneath. I couldn't really figure out what he was talking about, but this guy knew good art when he saw it. So I got myself over there and went into the place and asked them to open the cage and show me the quilt. Two employees came in and we opened it up, and uh, it was so powerful to me that I was kind of blown back a little bit. And I turned to them and I said, what do you know about this quilt? And one of them yelled to somebody else in the store, hey, Gertrude, didn't this quilt used to have a piece of paper with it? Yeah, I think we threw it away. Don't do that, folks. Don't do that. Um, Please tell your story on the back of the quilt. Put it on a muslin piece, anything you want to say and everything you want to say, so the future historians will not be heartbroken and have to make up their own stories about your quilt. Here's my story about this quilt. It had no provenance, but here's my story about it. How could it be anything other than a mourning quilt? Here in the center is a coffin-shaped piece, and in that is an urn with a lily. I was once giving a talk at a quilt guild and called this a calla lily, and a young woman in the audience who was a botanist said to me, that's not a calla lily, that's called an alba lily, and it only grows on the West Coast. And that was helpful. That was actually a clue in trying to put together where this was made and hopefully why it was made. I think it's fairly clear, even though we don't have the facts, that this was a quilt, a mourning quilt. It's just a mourning quilt. And there's so many wonderful and unusual things about it. It's a crazy quilt in the sense that every piece of the background is sewn together and is random shaped. But as somebody, a costume person, pointed out to me, this shape looks like it might be the broad collar of a morning dress, and made me wonder whether the quilt maker had taken apart her own morning dress, made a background for the quilt on which she put things that were important to her about him, about their life together, and express her feelings. Look around. There's a shield and a bunch of flags. Military. Was he in the military? There's a couple pieces of what looks like might be a wedding dress. There's children. There's toys. There's knives. There's flowers all over it. There's grapes. There's another clue. If we're going to place this on the West Coast and we're looking at grapes, maybe that's a sign too that it was made in California. I've had this quilt for a long time and I've studied it a lot. But it took me several years before I actually noticed and wondered about the words right at the top of the bottom of the inner border on top. What it says is Taft and Penoyer guaranteed. Well, once I saw that, I Googled it. And what did I find? I found that Taft and Penoyer was a large, thriving department store in Oakland, California that had only one branch. Apparently, they had fabric made for them and put their own label on it. So that helped me, of course, then place this thing even more specifically. It's probably a California quilt. It's made about 1900. And as we talked about before, there's so many things going on in it, and it's so freely and expressively put together. Um, Presuming, and it's a presumption, that this was made during a period of mourning, it made me wonder whether her stitches, her embroidery stitches, which are so precise and consistent and even in some places, get quite wild in other places, as if her feelings during the period of mourning, which of course can go from here to there to here to there, might have been expressed in the embroidery. This is one of my most treasured pieces. It means a lot to me, and I'm happy to share it with you today.